Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about using secondary sources to make powerful arguments in your essay. Often, when we write essays for college or for school, they're considered argumentative. And that means that your job as the writer is to basically make a claim, convince your reader that what you're saying makes sense, and you also want to uncover a deeper layer in whatever it is you're writing about. So essentially, you have three jobs whenever you write an argumentative essay. You need to come up with an original, insightful interpretation. You need to write accurately and logically so that your thoughts are understandable. And lastly, you need to present your argument strongly enough so that it can't be refuted. These are all things that essay writers work on constantly. But today I want to explore one way to meet that third goal, making an airtight argument. And specifically, I want to show you how you can use secondary sources to do that. So, first of all, what are secondary sources? In short, secondary sources are like commentaries on are blah. In short, secondary sources are commentaries on your primary text. So, for example, in Chumash, we have the Psukim, right? That would be the primary text. And then we have Rashi, Ramban, Ibn Ezra, others. Those are commentaries. Those commentaries are secondary sources. They're offering thoughts and questions on the Psukim. So they would act as secondary sources, whereas the Psukim would act as a primary text. We have the same thing, lahavdil, in the world of literature and writing. We begin by studying a primary text, and then we expand our view outward to commentators or secondary sources. So, for example, in the 10th grade, we're reading Mouse. That would be a primary text. If I ask them to read this scholarly article called The Graphic Narrative Introduction by Hilary Shute and Miranda Kavan, that would be an example of a secondary source. This article is about the emerging significance of graphic novels in the world of serious literature. So it relates to the topic, but it's not entirely about Mouse. Okay, so why do we care so much about secondary sources? Well, when you include them in an essay, um, it makes your argument. Why do we care so much about secondary sources? When I was in high school and I saw the requirement on an essay to include secondary sources, I was just annoyed because it means that I had to waste time looking stuff up on the internet, long articles that I didn't want to read, and I would just use one sentence from them, stick them in my article, and quote cite it on my works cited page and just go back to writing what I wanted to write in my essay. It took me until college to learn a lot more about the role of secondary sources. See, when you use them powerfully, secondary sources in an essay make your reader stop and say, oh, wow, it's not just some 12th grader or some freshman in college who has this opinion. An expert in the field whose work was published in a journal and reviewed by other experts to say, yeah, this is true and makes sense, has this opinion. And that makes your argument really strong. Also, when you pull in evidence from a secondary source, you're acknowledging that people who are older and wiser than you have come across this text before, noticed things about it, and written up their own interpretations on it. In a way, when you truly work with the secondary sources, you can step away a little bit from arguing your own claim and essentially say, here's a claim, other people before me have made it, I'm going to organize it all for you in this paper, here it is. So let's go back to the mouse example for a minute. Let's say my professor assigned an essay in which we needed to make an argument about why the author chose to write Mouse as a graphic novel rather than any other format. I have an idea in my head for a thesis, but first I go do some research and see what other people have to say about this topic. Okay, so let's say I come across this scholarly article on a database, and it's not even about Mouse. But I see that in discussing the topic of the graphic narrative, the authors do touch on Mouse. And if I had the full source for you, you would see how it's in there, but I just embedded a little screenshot in the slide. They say a bunch about Mouse, and I find an idea in there that relates to the point I want to make in my essay. So let's say here, let's just move my little bubble up here. Okay, so let's say I'm reading through and I find this little piece that relates to something I wanted to write about, which is that, oops, that's not what I wanted to do, which is that Mouse really confused people when it first came out because they weren't sure if it was like highbrow, sophisticated literature or just like a comic book, like all other comic books we know about, not something to be taken seriously. So I find this little excerpt in the piece. As you can see, I've annotated it digitally. I've highlighted some things that relate to my essay, and now I can go back and just pull them out really easily. So So let's say I find this really great piece of evidence. This one down here, let's take a look at it. So this says many critics struggled with the language of comics in the sense that they virtually ignored the fact that Mouse is a work of comics. So I could tie this into my essay in the following way. So let's think this out. So first, I need to figure out what point I want to raise. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm just copy and pasting this because I've already figured this all out. Let's say I want to say, when Mouse first appeared, it confused scholars and critics. Readers did not know whether to consider highbrow, oops, I forgot, I lost the rest of the quote, highbrow, sophisticated literature, or simply a comic book undeserving of deeper analysis. These are my own thoughts. This is the claim that I want to propose. So, what I need to do next is I need to uh, prove that somebody smarter than me had this idea because that will make my argument really strong. So, I need to indicate to the reader that I'm going to introduce a secondary source. So, I'm going to give the reader of my essay a little heads up that I'm going to be quoting someone else. So I say in their article, Introduction Graphic Narrative, Hilary L. Shute and Marianne de Cavan describe how after Spiegelman published Mouse, and now I want to put in my quote, I want to put in that evidence. So let's get this into the outline. Now I'm just copying and pasting directly from the evidence, citing properly. Let's make a little more room because I'm not done yet. I integrated the evidence, but I need to tie it back to my original claim. I need to remind my reader why I'm bringing this point up in the first place, and that is because I think that it backs up my original point, which is a little analysis that critics did not possess an established vocabulary for analyzing such works. Okay, so let's put this all together into a neat paragraph so we can see how this would look. So altogether, it would read something like this. Let's just make that a little bigger. Okay. So my topic sentence is, when Mouse first appeared, it confused scholars and critics. Readers did not know whether to consider it highbrow, sophisticated literature or simply a comic book undeserving of deeper analysis. That's the thought that I want to suggest. In their article, Introduction Graphic Narrative, Hilary L. Shute and Marianne de Cavan describe how after Spiegelman published Mouse, and here's the quote, many critics struggled with the language of comics in the sense that they virtually ignored the fact that Mouse is a work of comics, cited properly. Back to my own thoughts, critics did not possess an established vocabulary for analyzing such works. By appearing in such a vacuum of predecessors, the graphic novel took its place as revolutionary and trailblazing. So, this is how I kind of intertwined my own thoughts with the thoughts of the secondary source to both introduce my claim and also provide evidence to show what makes it true and what makes it strong. And that was a long walkthrough. But the point is that you should be deliberate in the way you use secondary sources. Let the secondary source do the work for you. Let it carry the main thrust of your argument. Then all you have to do is follow along and connect the dots between your argument and the argument of the secondary source. In class, we'll practice working with secondary sources, and in no time at all, you'll be a pro at using them powerfully in your essays also. See you. Bye.